Welcome back to Tuesday Tips for Leaders of Volunteers. I am your host, Dana Litwin, and this week we're talking about not just International Volunteer Day, so celebrating that and having immense gratitude for all of the work that volunteers do around the world, but also about the first impressions that an individual or a group of volunteers can have of your agency with their initial experience volunteering with you, and how that can really make or break the rest of that relationship, not just with that person or that community group or that partnership, but can ripple out into the community as well. So I'm going to illustrate this point of you don't get a second chance at a first impression with 3 stories from my life, 2 in times that I've volunteered, and 1 leading a group of volunteers in a volunteer program for an agency that kind of illustrate the importance of first impressions, or really adapting even potentially a day of volunteering that's starting to go off the rails to still try to get a positive result for everyone out of it. My very first time volunteering, I was in kindergarten. It was a coastal cleanup in Southern California. I think it was organized through my elementary school at the time. And this is, my community. I lived in a coastal Southern California community. And it really was, I have enormously happy, fun memories of that event. Of course, as a 5-year-old, I have no idea what the forms or the paperwork or the intake was like. I didn't have to worry about any of that. All I knew was that the event organizers were really warm and welcoming, and they were great at explaining, even to my little growing brain, how important the work was that we were doing that day, how important it was to other people who want to enjoy the beach and the ocean, and how important it is to the wildlife on land and in the sea. And that started really a core value for me deep in my heart and soul to be devoted to conservation and environmentalism for the rest of my life. And so that occurred throughout my youth and the work I did with conservation agencies, which led to another volunteering opportunity as a teenager. I had the opportunity when I was about 19 to go to the Soviet Union. Yes, it was still the Soviet Union, and do some conservation work that was like an exchange program. So Soviet and Russian teams were coming to the States and doing some environmental work, and about 30 Americans were chosen from the different conservation corps to go over there for a couple of months and kind of demonstrate how to do the proper kind of wetlands restoration and things like that. And it was overall a really great experience. But one of the days that we were there, they kind of ran out of stuff for us to do. So we got shuffled over to a very random construction site that wasn't ready for us. And the on-site manager was clearly very annoyed and frustrated that, he had a group of American teenagers and early 20 people, conservation people, dumped on his work site to do something for the day. And he snapped at us in Russian all day, and all we ended up doing was moving piles of gravel back and forth. It had no meaning. It was grueling busy work, and it was one of the most miserable days I've had doing any kind of conservation work, let alone as a volunteer or as an international representative. And that was exactly what not to do. A completely different system and culture and society around that kind of activity than we have in the Western world, North America, where I am now. But it made such an impression on me that even though at that point in my life I didn't realize I was going to go into volunteer program design and management, administration, and leading volunteers, I had no idea. That was years away still. But as I shifted into this career that I'm in now, that stayed with me, to never give somebody that experience of just moving a pile of gravel back and forth and busy work just to keep us busy for 6 or 7 or 8 hours for no reason, but just to do busy work and to seem busy, and to aim to help people have a positive experience with any agency that I work with that's more like when I was 5, like the wonder of a kid really having a joy and feeling like they're doing meaningful work in a really core heart level. And I had the opportunity some years later, I've talked about this example in some of my webinars as well, but we had an annual community partner, a big outdoorsy company that would come to our open space agency with about 50 or 60 employees every year around the same date, every weekend, of the year. And we had a great community partnership with them, and they would give our agency grants, and we would do these group volunteers, and then some of those volunteers from the group would follow up and become individual volunteers in other kinds of roles like docents or trail patrol and things like that. And it was always a really fun event. Well, one year we started to get rained out, and we couldn't quite cancel with the weather. We couldn't quite get word to the company in time. So we figured, well, my staff and I and my other volunteer leaders would be thinking, well, whoever shows up, we're going to give them the best experience we can with the weather and the circumstances that we have. So about half as many people as usual showed up, about 20 or 25 people showed up. And it was raining off and on, and we had to completely switch gears from the kind of trail work that we were going to do to, you guessed it, moving piles of gravel around to armor the trail and to make it less muddy and to not have it erode. So in this case, it was moving piles of gravel around for a very clear meaning and purpose that did help achieve what we wanted to, which was trail maintenance for the day. However, resetting all of our equipment, we had all the wrong equipment to deal with the rain, took about an hour to run down to hardware stores and have trucks get wheelbarrows and things. And I had to stall. I didn't want people from this company to have to stand around doing nothing for an hour. So I happened to arrange with one of the rangers to like, hey, let's actually offer them a really fun interpretive, 30-minute hike, small hike, no big deal. But let's tell them about the burrowing owls and the badgers and all this cool stuff. And let's make this time count in a different way. And he was all for it. And we had a great time tootling around the trail, and they had lots of questions. And by the time we circled back, all the equipment was ready, and we worked as much as we could the rest of the day. When the rain got to be too much, we stopped, had lunch, stopped a little bit early, but everyone overall still had a positive time in a similar circumstance where I had so many decades ago had a miserable time moving piles of gravel around in the rain. And the difference was really, one, we were all, not just me, my whole team was like genuinely warm and welcome and happy and interested in their comfort, their convenience, their connection to the work that we were going to do that day on the trail. So we had warm coffee, and we had snacks, and we set up this spontaneous activity. And that hike was so popular and so successful that not only did we get many more individuals than usual from this group wanting to get into other kinds of volunteer roles, more regularly scheduled roles, but every other team, because this company sent out about 10 or 20 teams all over the San Francisco Bay Area to do this on this one service day, every other team got jealous that they got a special interpretive hike about badgers and burrowing owls that day. And from then on, in the years after, working with the same company, everyone wanted to start with that interpretive hike. So we just worked it into the day to have that kind of extra special event at the beginning. And that also kind of helped to warm up everyone's bodies. It was a very gentle, pretty much flat trail. And that became a regular feature. So something that was kind of a panicked, last minute, really rushed decision with me and the park maintenance staff to like, what are we going to do now? Instead of just like, oh, sorry, everyone, you drove up here, go home, cancel. It's like, well, we can still have a cool experience together if you're willing to come along with us on this. And people were. So that first impression of, people who hadn't done this work before, usually work in offices, coming and having that really positive experience in what could have gone really, really off the rails in a bad way, that's a great example of everything that I wanted to share of that experience, and also being very determined because of my other volunteering experiences, especially in the USSR on that one day, even though the rest of it was great, that's like, I'm never going to allow, if I'm in charge of a volunteer activity, I'm never going to allow someone to feel like their work is drudgery, meaningless, and unappreciated ever. I'm never going to allow that to happen. So for International Volunteer Day, I hope you've enjoyed a couple of little anecdotes of some of my international experience, and also can find some Tuesday tips and nuggets of wisdom about creating a really great first impression when you work with volunteers in your agency. So I hope you have a great celebratory week, and we'll see you again next time.